For the Oakland Raiders, 2017, in theory, appeared to hold so much promise. Coming off of a double-digit wins season and a playoff appearance with Derek Carr, your franchise quarterback, having an MVP type of season. I know the season didn't ultimately end the way you maybe wanted, with him breaking his leg late in the year and you having to roll into a wild card game with Connor Cook as your starting quarterback. But you still had reason to believe that Derek Carr comes back. Things are going well. They could, in theory, get better. And this could be a team that could be a force to be reckoned with in the AFC come 2018. Especially when you had the news of them getting Marshawn Lynch to agree to come out of retirement and come back home to play in the Bay Area for the Oakland Raiders. Now they've got that presence in the running game that they sorely lacked. It's going to take this team to the next level. And you started getting that hype train rolling. Chugga, 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 chugga. Like the autumn wind is a Raider type of stuff. And this team was being discussed all over the place as a possible Super Bowl contender, a potential threat to the New England Patriots' supremacy in the AFC. And that's what it was being talked about. But then the 2017 season happened. I still can't understand why Jack Del Rio fired his offensive coordinator, who was Bill Musgrave. When Derek Carr's coming off of an MVP type of season, why would you fire the coordinator that put him in situations to succeed and look as good as he did in 2016? That was crazy. And ultimately, Marshawn Lynch wasn't beast mode. He was more like mediocre meh mode. He really was. He just wasn't the same. And the offense in general wasn't the same. Derek Carr wasn't the same. Amari Cooper wasn't the same. And then the defense still stunk. So, early on in the year, you get that 4-game losing streak. You lose to Washington, Denver, Baltimore, and the Chargers, and they just never really recovered from there. They dug themselves a really big hole earlier in the year, and then losing the last 4 games of the year to Kansas City, Dallas, Philadelphia, the Chargers. It ended up being such a disappointing season, and I think beyond question the most disappointing team in the AFC had to be the Oakland Raiders in 2017. So looking at it, even though you're only one season removed from a playoff appearance, I can't be that surprised or say that I knock the decision to fire Jack Del Rio. You should have been thinking about at least 10-6, not going 6-10. I mean, this to me is accountability for firing your offensive coordinator when it feels like you really didn't have a reason to do so. This team losing their last 4 games, like they just lost it. They just didn't have it. It seems like they weren't prepared to win. They weren't motivated to win. So it's not surprising to see Jack Del Rio get fired. What is surprising, however, is how everything came about with that Jack Del Rio firing. Because what that really meant is that Mark Davis had a man in mind. Mark Davis knew who he wanted to be that guy to get more out of Derek Carr, who he loves, and to help take this team to the next level. Whether Reggie McKenzie was on board with it or not didn't matter. And now we found out what that plan was. John Gruden has 100 million reasons to love coaching in the NFL again. Holy hell. He gave John Gruden, a guy who hasn't coached in over a decade, a guy with years of past accolades, but honestly, with a run in Tampa that outside of that first season where they won the Super Bowl with really somebody else's team, after that they really weren't all that notable. They had a couple of playoff appearances, but nothing really of significance happened. You just gave this guy $10 million a year for a decade to come back out of the commentary booth and be the head coach of your football team. This is crazy. This is insane. This guy was so much in love with having John Gruden back home with the Oakland Raiders that he's willing to pay Gruden $10 million and Jack Del Rio $5 million this year to not coach the team and give Gruden $10 million to coach the team. He sunk $15 million into the head coaching position in a cash-strapped organization for 2018. And they're not even moving to Las Vegas yet. This is nuts. It's not just the $10 million a year figure, which I think is kind of nuts in and of himself, but ultimately that was your guy. That was what it was going to take. The fact that you committed 10 years to him, How many head coaches in the NFL actually make it to 5 years, let alone 7, 8, 9, or 10? And you want to commit $10 million per season for the next decade when you are already kind of low on the cash flow and you are a bit cash strapped as an organization in part because of what you had to do to get the Las Vegas deal done. You're going to commit that much money to Gruden? What happens if this thing goes south and you have to fire him in a couple of years? You're going to be paying $10 million a year for several years potentially to a guy who didn't get the job done, to a guy that's not coaching your team and then still having to pay somebody else to actually be your head coach. Holy Christ! It's insane! Now, it could work. It makes sense to bring in somebody that's been known over the years as a quarterback whisperer to work with a guy like Derek Carr, but he's been away from the game in terms of the coaching trenches for almost a decade now. His late run in Tampa, yes, he had a bunch of mediocre to bad quarterbacks like Bruce Gradkowski and Chris Sims and so forth, so how much are you going to win with them? And that's true. But ultimately, holy hell. Unless Gruden chooses to walk away, which maybe that's the hope if you're the Raiders. You gave him that money now and you figure it out later. Maybe after 5 or 6 years, he'll come to you and say he doesn't want to do it anymore, and that gives you an out from the contract. But that might not. He might stay there for 10 years because $10 million per year, that is a lot of money. And that will take him through to retirement in his NFL life. Oh, wow. Anyways, the Raiders have made a statement. Clearly they wanted to make a statement, and they made a statement. They made a big one. Is it going to be the right one or not? We'll see. So what type of situation does John Gruden walk into now as the new head man of the Oakland Raiders? Well, you've got a team that lacks in major flexibility in terms of the salary cap. They've got just short of $25 million in salary cap space. Now they could potentially free up some additional space by releasing Marshawn Lynch, potentially releasing Michael Crabtree, and I wouldn't be surprised if one or both of them may be shown the door, perhaps both of them, but then that will leave some additional holes on your team that honestly has more holes than you realized on both sides of the ball. The number one priority of the program is going to be, though, getting Khalil Mack locked up long term. He's entering his 5th year. You're in that 5th year option. You're staring down the barrel of, oh my God, what are we going to have to pay him if we wait until next offseason? Because you're going to have to pay him. You can't let Khalil Mack go. You can't let the true franchise player of the Oakland Raiders, one of the all-time great Raiders already, yeah, I said it because you know it's true. You can't let him walk. You're not going to let him walk. So it's better to have people perceive that you overpay him now than have to overpay even more in another year. No matter what it takes, you got it done with Derek Carr last year. The Raiders must get it done with Khalil Mack this year. He is on that Mount Rushmore of best defensive players in the National Football League, and anybody that argues that is a clown. These type of difference makers, these type of game changers, these type of super studs do not come around every day. So if the only major thing you accomplish in your offseason via what you have available with the salary cap and with free agency is to get Khalil Mack locked up long-term in kind, similar to what you did with Derek Carr, then that is still a successful offseason for the Oakland Raiders. It's the only thing that matters. It is priority A, number freaking 1. Get him locked up long-term. Period. But then you look ahead to the NFL draft. They've got picks in rounds 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7. They'll either be picking 9th or 10th overall in round 1, depending on the coin flip with the 49ers. I believe, again, that happens at the Combine. So we'll see how that goes. What do the Raiders need? Because honestly, when you saw this team this year, you understood that there were still plenty of flaws on both sides of the ball. Plenty of flaws all over the place. I think, number one, they need a young, 3-down difference maker running back. They really, really do. That has to be addressed in the first 2 days of the draft. I don't know if it gets addressed with that first-round pick, although it could, but it's definitely got to be addressed by round 3 at the latest. And again, this is a good class for running backs, so there is some depth there. So you might still be able to find that guy, but they've got to find that guy. They've got to find that guy. You've got to give a better, more consistent presence in the ground game to Derek Carr than what you have given him in the first 4 years of his career, and it's that simple. especially if they release Michael Crabtree. They're probably going to need to address wide receiver, and there at least looks to be some depth in terms of quality NFL players. I don't know if there's a bunch of super studs in this draft at the wide receiver position, but there's talent there. There's depth of talent there. But that's a position that's going to need to be addressed either way. Then defensively, I feel like that linebacking core could be significantly upgraded. And then looking at the defensive line, I feel like they could use some beef in the middle. I still feel like they can use some help in that secondary. You look at this past year in the draft, they took Garyon Conley in the first round. He hardly played. Obi Melifonwu didn't play much because he got hurt early in the year. So their first two picks were invested on the defensive side of the ball, and they got almost nothing out of them. Now, hopefully for the Raiders, you get both of those guys in and healthy in 2018, and it makes a difference. But you could still use some more depth and explosive talent, or at least athleticism and speed, in that secondary. They definitely need to address that front seven to me. Another piece in the trenches, particularly in the middle, and then that linebacking core could use an infusion of talent and athleticism. But you look at this situation for the Raiders, and you look at it and you say, you don't know what's going to happen with the Chargers come next year. They're not scaring you. They could be better, but they're not scaring you at this point. The Chiefs, you assume they're going to move on from Alex Smith. They're going to go with Patrick Mahomes, but what happens with some of the other pieces in that roster? What other changes are made? Could they take a step back? The Denver Broncos are either looking at a veteran quarterback or a rookie. Could they take a step back? Or even if they take a step forward, how much of a step are they really taking? That division is still in play for the Oakland Raiders in 2018. There could be some early payoffs, some early success for John Gruden, and I expect there to be. I really do. But you got to get Khalil Mack's contract extended. Don't risk the holdout. Don't risk anything. Get him signed. Pay the man. And then get the talent in the right places in the draft and let John Gruden go to work with Derek Carr. And perhaps the Raiders will be back in the playoff mix in 2018.